Howdy.
And welcome to Queer Peer Reviews, where we review queer media, good, bad, and ugly. I'm your host, Jamie, and today with me is my co-host, Lewis.
Hi. So here at Queer Peer Reviews, we'll be reviewing your favorite TV shows, movies, video games, and anything more with any kind of queer representation.
So today on Queer Peer Reviews, we'll be reviewing the 2005 controversial gay film, Brokeback Mountain, which stars Heath Ledger and Jake Gyllenhaal. So the film takes place in Wyoming back in 1963. We are introduced to two characters, Ennis Del Mar and Jack Twist. Both of them are looking for work, and they wind up going to this guy named, I forget the dude's name.
I forget his name too, but I just remember it was like a trailer out in the middle of nowhere. Yeah. And they were just desperate for work, man.
Yeah.
But like, aren't we all in this day and age?
Very true. So yeah, they go inside of this trailer, talk to this guy, and he's like, hey, like, I need some guys to watch over the sheep over on the mountain. So they got hired to be sheep herders. And he told them basically they'd be camping out in the mountain. Supplies would only be coming once a week. Mm-hmm. So basically they were just
They were out fending for themselves and fending these sheep from all the wolves.
So Ennis and Jack don't really talk a lot until a little bit later into their stay at Brokeback Mountain. Ennis goes to get supplies from the supply run, and on his way back he gets attacked by a bear and loses all these supplies. So when he returns back to camp, Jack kind of just goes up to him and is like, oh yeah, let me fix that for you.
The first sign of, something might be a little fishy going on over here.
And speaking of fishy, a little bit later, Ennis goes to like take off all of his clothes to go bathe, and you kind of just see Jack just like eating, trying not to look.
Listen, he had dinner and a show at that point.
And a show, yeah.
So
AMC could never. But yeah, so the two begin to bond. Ennis reveals that this is the most he's ever really talked to somebody in almost a year, which kind of says a lot about Jack and how he feels about Jack. One night, on a really cold night, they decide, okay, we're gonna take turns sleeping in this tent because someone needs to watch the sheep, and we can't both be out here because we're both gonna get really tired. So they take turns sleeping in the tent that they brought with them.
So the whole basis of it was that somebody had to stay up with the sheep like overnight at all times because they had to hunt down the wolves if they were trying to hunt the sheep.
Yeah.
And then somebody else would have to remain at base camp and just make sure that like base camp was okay and everything else. But yeah, that one night they ended up just getting hammered off of whiskey. I mean, any good old man's dream. But they got hammered off of whiskey and they got too drunk, and that's the reason why he never even made it back up to the mountain.
Oh, yeah.
And he was like, why don't you just stay the night?
Yeah, but...
And he was like, bet, I'll sleep outside with the logs.
Yeah, because, you know, tough men, they don't share tents together because that's gay.
Men don't get cold.
It's very gay. But unfortunately, Ennis does start getting a little cold, and Jack, the caring soul that he is, goes, Ennis, come on in.
Come on in.
Come on in, Ennis. So they go snuggle up right next to each other, fall asleep. But shortly after, Jack wakes up in the middle of the night and just takes Ennis's hand and like pulls it over him like he's like spooning him.
He's ready to cuddle. He's ready to be the little spoon.
Yeah, and then momentarily after that, Ennis wakes up and is like, yo, what are you doing? What are you doing?
And then we're presented with the most aggressive sexual scene.
Raunchy as hell.
Raunchy. Yeah, Jack gets pushed down by Ennis, and
Jack
Ennis is like, I'm willingly.
Ass is up in the air, ready for Ennis.
Jack was a perfect example of what these tiny gay twinks all be shouting on Grindr to these gay daddies, okay? They're just like, I want to be pinned against the wall. I want to be pinned to the floor, and then I want you to have your way with me. And that, Jack was the power bottom that the world was craving.
But yeah, so after that raunchy night, you know, it's a little awkward. They talk to each other, and Ennis goes up to Jack. He's like, you know, that was a one-time thing, right? I ain't queer. After he just railed Jack in that little tent they just had.
You just railed him in the next week.
But you know, they ain't queer.
No queer here at Queer Peer Review.
But yeah, they say this is a one-time thing, but the next night, Ennis goes to Jack's tent again and is like, I'm cold.
I'm cold. But see, that's where the comfort starts, because then that's what started to draw the line between their little love affair up on Brokeback and them just not doing their job anymore.
But yeah, the next day their boss comes up to deliver some bad news about one of Jack's family members, but he starts watching from afar and sees the two of them start playing with each other shirtless. They start tackling each other, and then they just take their hats, block it, and then that's when they kiss. And their boss witnesses all of that, and shortly after that, he ends their job early. So after their job was unfortunately cut short early, Jack goes up to Ennis, hey, are you gonna come back next summer? But Ennis reveals, oh no, I'm supposed to marry Alma, my fiance. And that kind of makes Jack a little sad, but he's like, okay, whatever. So after Ennis goes and marries his fiancée Alma, they wind up having 2 daughters. And Jack, the following summer, goes back to their boss and says, hey, like, I'm back for work. Do you have any work for me? And he goes,
there's no work for people like you here.
Not boys like them. Not boys like them. And he winds up meeting Miss Anne Hathaway, his future wife, a.k.a. Lorraine in the movie. They wind up hooking up in the back of his car. Anne Hathaway is on top.
Anne Hathaway atop, are we even surprised?
But yeah, just shows that even gay men like Anne Hathaway, because she is just amazing.
That's one way to put it.
So 4 years goes by, others happy with their own separate lives, and then one day, Alma asks, Ennis, do you know someone named Jack Twist?
It was something about like reuniting for like a fishing trip.
Yeah, let's reunite for a good old fishing trip back on Brokeback. Just, you know, come on.
You want to come back to Brokeback, Jack? Oh, wait, no, Ennis? Ennis, you want to come back to Brokeback? I'll break it back, up on Brokeback.
Wow. So Ennis writes back to Jack, and shortly after that, Jack drives all the way up to, I believe Wyoming is where...
From Texas, yeah.
Yeah, Jack drives all the way from Texas to see Ennis again. And that's when Ennis is like just waiting for his car to arrive. He sees him pull up, runs outside. It's like, Jack fucking Twist. And he runs down, they hug, like friends do, obviously, when you haven't seen each other for a while, and they just look at each other for a bit. And then,
it was one hand placed upon the cheek, and then the most aggressive makeout session pinned against the wall yet again, okay? So if we learned anything from this movie...
Just aggressive.
Aggressive, and how Jack is a hungry power bottom.
Yes, he is.
He doesn't deny any of it.
Let's go, come on, give it to me straight. But yeah, they start making out.
I don't think he's giving it to him straight.
So in the middle of their makeout session, Ennis's wife Alma goes out the door to be like, okay, like you guys want to come in, but she stops because she witnesses her husband making out with this man who he's about to go on a fishing trip with. Alma, being so shocked, she doesn't even say anything when they come inside the house. She doesn't confront him about it, and this becomes an ongoing thing throughout the film. And during this fishing trip, Jack talks about, hey, like, why don't you move up to like a ranch with me? We could both be together and like.
Well, yeah, he was talking about his parents, how his parents like have a ranch, and then he wanted Ennis to come move down, and that they would open up this ranch together, and they would run this whole business, and nobody would ever suspect anything. They were just 2 business partners living together.
And they could just be how they are just all the time.
So Ennis describes to us a situation where, when he was a little boy, how there was a gay man or a gay couple that was living out in the town.
It was like an older gay couple
Yeah,
too.
so some older gay couple was like living in the town that he grew up in, and everyone kind of like knew about it, but nobody really spoke about it. Until one day, one of those men was found dead in a ditch. Ennis's dad took him to go see this man's body, and that's when it was kind of told to young Ennis that this man was grabbed by his dick and dragged around this, like the whole town pretty much, and then just left there beat and dead as a gay hate crime back then. And that's kind of when it was instilled in Ennis that at a very young age that, you know what, like this is what happens to you if you live this kind of lifestyle. So that's the only thing that was really going through his mind.
So years go by, and Ennis and Jack start meeting up more frequently for these fishing trips. We start learning how difficult Ennis's life has been, staying married to his wife, which eventually leads to a divorce. And Jack hears about Ennis's divorce, which he immediately just drives up to Wyoming to be like, hey, like, I heard about the divorce, like.
He wanted to shoot his shot as
Yeah.
fast as possible, too. He took no time to waste it.
No time whatsoever. And he, once again, brings up the whole question, like, why don't we live together? And, like, you can come to the ranch. And at the time, Ennis had his 2 daughters with him, and he's like, this is not the time, Jack. And that makes Jack very upset. Jack winds up going to Mexico just to have a good time, have some good old sex with some of the gay people down in Mexico, which apparently they mentioned in the movie, like, there are a lot of gay people, like, in this one area, like,
In the one
Mexico.
area that they went, yeah. But yeah, he went to Mexico to show these Mexican boys a couple real hillbilly. A real hillbilly.
That following Thanksgiving, Ennis goes to Thanksgiving dinner at Alma's new either boyfriend, fiance, husband's house with his 2 kids, just so he could be with his kids. And after dinner, he goes into the kitchen, and that's when Alma finally, after all these years, confronts him about what he's been doing with his dear friend Jack Twist.
She starts confronting about everything. She confronts him about how the price tag is still on his fishing box. She talks about how she attached a little cute note to the end of the fishing line that's still there after all these years of all these fishing trips.
Yeah, because she started noticing that Ennis never brought home any fish, and she kind of thought, maybe he's bad at fishing, but no.
But he would always brag to her about, oh my gosh, like we caught all of these fish and like we always had a plethora to eat and all this stuff. But he also knows that Alma and his daughters love eating fish.
Yes.
And that's when she put her 2 and 2 together, as if she didn't put 2 and 2 together,
When they were
watching
making out.
Jack and Sir Ennis making out
'cause
inside their
maybe for all
house.
she knows, that's just how they greet each other. And maybe on this fishing trip, they didn't do any more kissing or anything like that. Maybe, who knows? But yeah, this note on Ennis's fishing pole says, "Bring home some fish, Ennis." Which, after the fishing trip is over, didn't come home with any fish, and that note was still in his tackle box. So he gets really frustrated. He starts yelling at her. She starts yelling at him, and that's when Ennis just gets really, like, aggressive. And I think he pushes her too, and he storms
that's-
out of the house.
He also threatens to hit her and make her meet the floor.
Yeah. So then this brings us to the final meetup of Ennis and Jack. After, this is years later, both of them are, like, a lot older than they were when they first met up.
Yeah, at this point, Ennis's daughters were like teenagers now. We're like
Yeah.
late teens.
And during their final meetup, Jack now is asking Ennis, like, let's go to Mexico together. Like, that's some place where we can have a good life and not worried about, like, that story that he told them about that older gay couple getting murdered by the townspeople. But then that's when Ennis says, like, I can't go with you. I can't leave where I am now. Like, I need to stay working at my job so I can pay child support due to the divorce. And that's when they start to argue, and Ennis blames Jack for making him this way, aka gay. And it just blows up in their faces. They just argue and just part ways after that.
They argue, they do the little like fight love BS combo that they like to do throughout the whole movie where it's like, let's fight, aggressively make out, let's keep fighting.
And then one of them winds up getting hurt and the other one babies. I'm like, are you okay?
Are you okay? I didn't mean to. Yeah, because that's exactly what happened. It was, he broke down and then was consoling him. It was like, it's going to be okay, like, ba 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 ba. It's always the same routine with the 2 of them. But yeah, that was their last meetup and it didn't really end pretty. And like, it wasn't even discussed when or if they were ever going to go on another one of these fishing trips together.
Yeah, so years after that, Ennis tries reaching out to Jack, and unfortunately one of his letters is returned because on the letter it says deceased. So obviously that would raise any sort of concern out of him, and that's when he finds the phone number for Jack's wife, Lorene.
Well, Ennis calls Lorene and finds out that Jack had passed away, but something doesn't necessarily add up all that well with Lorene's story about how it happened. I think she said something around like his tire blew out, he went to go change it, and then he ended up getting hit in the face with like one of the tire parts or whatever.
Yeah, I think there was a lot of tire pressure, and the tire exploded, blew up in his face, and he wound up choking or drowning in his own blood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we see throughout the film that he was actually beat with a tire iron and was hate crimed to death.
So during this phone call when Ennis is speaking to Lorene, she mentions how he would always, like if he were to pass away, he wants his ashes spread on Brokeback Mountain because it had a special place in his heart. So that's when Ennis decides he's gonna go down to Jack's parents' ranch. His father mentions, oh, Jack always used to mention in Ennis Del Mar and how they were gonna move into a ranch together, and it just never happened. And then Jack eventually, when he stopped talking about Ennis, found another guy that he was gonna bring down to the
And he
ranch.
did. So he did get this other dude, and they did come back and try to start up this ranch, and then that's when Jack was brutally murdered
Yeah.
for living with another man, essentially.
Yeah, and that's what was Ennis's biggest fear about moving in with Jack, is that they would
It would
get
happen to
killed,
them.
which it did, unfortunately, to Jack. Yeah, and I believe the dad does not want to give Ennis his
The
ashes
ashes.
because he knows who Ennis is. He knows that he's been in a relationship with his son. And even though he's not necessarily like, get out of my house, you queer, he talks to him, but he wants to keep his son's ashes with him and not spread on this mountain where he had this love affair with this other man.
This sinful mountain.
Very sinful. So, but they allow him to go up to Jack's room and just like look around, collect anything. So Ennis, when he's in his room, he finds a hanger that has 2 shirts on it, which is actually a shirt that Ennis believed he had left on Brokeback Mountain that he was like so upset about losing. And it was his shirt and Jack's shirt kind of intertwined.
Then after all of that, he finds out that, you know what, the dad's not gonna give me the ashes to spread over in Brokeback. So he kind of like goes on to like live on his really sad life. He moves into a trailer, lives alone, disconnects pretty much from his family. And then the last scene is just his daughter coming to visit him, asking for him to show up to her wedding.
And then after she leaves his trailer, he opens up his closet and he sees the 2 shirts that Jack kept of him. And it's just a very sad ending that you just were not expecting.
Oh, not at all. Like, my heart was ripped out right at the end of the film.
We watched it together, and I looked over to him. He was all teary-eyed.
Oh, I was, absolutely. And it wasn't the allergies, but I could blame it on those.
You could blame it on the allergies. But R.I.P. Jack Twist. All right, so let's get to the ratings here at Queer Peer Reviews. We'll be reviewing every piece of media that we review out of 5 different categories for a grand total of 100.
All right, let's start with representation. How well did Brokeback Mountain represent its queer theme and characters?
All right, so for representation, you ready? All right, so for representation, we give it.
So I gave it an 8 just because, I don't know, I felt like it was a pretty good representation of like the time frame of where the movie took place and everything else. Like, while in Jack's case, like that's kind of what brought my score down a little bit, was I kind of would like to have known a lot more about like Jack's background and just like with like his whole like coming about accepting his sexuality more and like getting more of that side from it. Because we saw a lot of it from Ennis, and we saw a lot of like the internalized homophobia. We saw a lot of like him just, you know, kind of going around the world and being what the world wanted him to be. And so I felt like it was a good representation of being a closeted gay man in the 60s, where hate crimes for gay men were very much like around and happening all the time. So like, it was a good representation of that fear.
Yeah, so my reason is kind of similar to yours. Like, it is good representation of closeted gay men back in the 60s because, like Lewis said, like, it just, gay was not okay back then. The only reason why I don't give it higher than a 7.5 is because I feel like the way they portrayed gay men is that, oh, like, all gay men are like these like sex-hungry people with wives and they're gonna cheat on their wives, like type of thing. Like, they are known for like, if a man is closeted, he will go out and cheat on his wife. While I'm sure there are gay men who are closeted that cheat on their straight significant others, I feel like that's what they kind of pushed Ennis and Jack to be. They both went out to marry women, but wound up frequently just cheating on them. But then again, it was the 60s. It wasn't something they could just come out and straight up say like, oh yeah, no, actually, like, we need a divorce. I'm not into women. Because they would get significantly hate crimed, which is why I gave it a 7.5, because it was very accurate for that timeline. So let's move on to the closet scale. So if you and I were still both in the closet, how likely would this film kind of give us the courage to come out?
So for the closet scale, we give it a 2.
I gave it a 3.6. So I'll, for obvious reasons, we just simply could not go higher than this. While it was like one of those movies where it's like, oh, it's so wholesome, but while it was wholesome, these guys are trying not to get hate crimed.
Yeah.
And their biggest fear was getting hate crimed, and it wound up happening to one of them.
Exactly.
So there wasn't necessarily any comforting of, okay, like, it's okay to be gay, like, yes, like, they found each other, and it just all went kind of downhill. Like, there wasn't anything that was necessarily, like I said, like, nothing was really comforting. Like, it was such like a raw experience of what happened in the 60s, and yeah,
Well, that's just what it is. It was very raw. Like,
Yeah.
the whole movie was raw and very much like, this is how it was, this is what happened, and like the motions that, like, I don't even want to say most people went through, but like it's what was around in the time frame. So like the movie wasn't as like other things that you will talk about on this channel and everything else. It wasn't like a very welcoming, it wasn't very open and warm and like cozy for like a gay audience per se, because you're looking at this from how brutal it really was. So like, that's why I really can't go higher than a 2. Amazes me you hit a 3.7,
So
1.7 higher, but I
I
guess.
got my reasonings for why I could have easily given this a 0. I will not give it a 0. But the reason why I give it a 3.7, which is higher than Lewis's 2, it just shows how better life is now, and that we're not living in the 60s.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
That I
like-
agree with.
Like, obviously, things like this still happen nowadays, but it's not as bad as it could have been. And a lot of people, like, that's why they say, like, oh, like, why are there so many gay people now? Like, it's a trend. It's not necessarily it's a trend. It's a lot of people are more comfortable coming out of the closet now. And that's why I give it a 3.7 and not a 0, even though this had no inspiration at all to coming out for me.
Next up is Originality.
So for Originality, we give it an 8 and an 8.5.
8.5.
Okay, very similar here. So why do you give it an 8.5?
I give it an 8.5. I feel like, first of all, I was late into the game, into like watching this. I feel like, I mean, I'm gay. I've been out since, came out as bi freshman year of high school, came out as gay senior year of high school, so like well over 5 years now. And I feel like this is like a movie that's always popped up in like gay culture and everything. To this day, haven't seen anything like it, and haven't seen anything like it before I watched it. So just based off of originality, like I would have to give it an 8.5. I've never really seen a movie that would depict like these two gay men living in the 60s, going through the struggles that gay men did in the 60s, and then kind of talking about like their secret lives. Also, the explicit amount of detail that went into the movie. I mean, it was over 2 hours long.
Oh, yeah.
So there was like a whole bunch of like just little details that they threw in that some of them were just a nuisance, and you were like, great, another 10-minute clip added onto a 2.5-hour movie. But again, like a lot of it did play a crucial part into the whole storyline, which is something I haven't seen done within like the gay world of film.
Yeah, so I totally agree with that. This came out in 2005, and this is way, way, way before gay marriage was legalized, and it was a hit. There's so many good reviews about this movie. It came out in 2005, and I think it was one of the first films, especially during that time, to show this very raw experience of gay people, and it wasn't one of those things where it's like, oh, like, we're being hate crimed, but in the end, it's a happy ending. We're gonna somehow find a way to be together. No, they died.
Yeah, well,
Jack died. But yeah, like you said, I haven't seen anything like it where it just depicts this very raw, accurate, just what life was like for gay men in the 60s. Next up is writing.
So for writing, we give it a 9.2.
And a 9. See, it
I'm
makes
not gonna
sense.
lie, I only gave it a 9.2 for comedic reasons because who am I to judge anything about writing? I just asked you what writing even meant 20 seconds ago before.
Yes, you did. Roll back the clip. All
Or
right.
defend writing. So I give it a 9.2, kind of how I explained in the last category, just like the movie did go into like a whole lot of detail. So the only thing that like kind of took down from my 10 was just the fact that, yeah, there was like some nuisance details that was just there for fluff. But for a 2.5-hour movie, do you really need fluff?
But I enjoyed the fluff, but again, like it took us 2 sessions to watch this movie because we had things to do with our lives. I really like the writing. Like I said, back in 2005, this is very advanced for 2005. And just one of my favorite things that they wrote into this film was Alma's note to Ennis to show that they were not actually going on these fishing trips. They were just meeting up to hook up. And just, it was a very enjoyable movie. There's a lot of things I didn't expect to happen that were just put into this movie, like Jack dying. It's upsetting that Jack died, but I love that they wrote that for him because it just shows that Ennis was kind of saving Jack in a sense because he was like, no, we can't. Something's gonna happen to us. And then as soon as Ennis stopped meeting up with Jack unfortunately passed away and was murdered.
And last but certainly not least, our all-around opinion about the film. That was good.
So for our overall feelings towards the film, we give it a 8.2 and a 7.8. Ooh. Yeah, so I really did enjoy the film. It was very moving, very emotional. I know, like, all that, like, the raunchy stuff in the beginning, like, really got us, like, screaming at it earlier because we just were not expecting it. Like, we knew, like, there were going to be some sex scenes, but just not that super rough, aggressive extent. But nonetheless, it was a very entertaining movie. It's, considering that it was made in 2005 and got so many great reviews, just overall, it was a very controversial film. There were people that were like, why are they putting this gay movie on the screen? But I just feel like if it didn't have 2 big names such as Jake Gyllenhaal and Heath Ledger, I feel like the movie would not have done so well.
The reason I kind of gave it a 7.8 was kind of pulling that fact where those were the 2 gay men represented in the film, where they really only brought that publicity to the movie because of the name. Because if it was any other just men playing the part, it probably wouldn't have gained as much traction, and instead probably would have become an even more controversial film, especially since it did come out in 2005. However, on the other side of it, this movie, like, we talked a lot throughout this episode about how, like, you know, we both hadn't seen the movie until we sat down and watched it together. But that being said, I wasn't completely blinded, and I didn't know 100% of what I was expecting walking into this film, but I still, like, knew, like, little details here and there from just, like, pop culture and everything else that kind of had its influence on it. But, like, I knew about the can of beans. I knew that there was something was going up on Brokeback Mountain. I knew something was going on in the tent.
Something is going up on Brokeback Mountain.
Something is going up on Brokeback Mountain.
It was a really great film, and I feel like it is a staple in gay culture. Like, whether you have seen it or not, like, it's definitely something you should watch if you haven't seen it recently. All right, so let's get our QPR total. AJ, hit us with that gay shit.
All right, so Brokeback Mountain has a 72.9 out of 100.
Okay.
So if you haven't seen this movie yet, or if you haven't seen it in a while, I think you got some homework to do now.
All right, so thank you for watching this episode of Queer Peer Reviews. In the description below, we will be including links to the Trevor Project and other fundraisers you can donate to. We will also provide links to our social media pages. Lewis, do you have any other words to say?
No.
All right, so thanks for watching. Stay tuned. We got plenty of more good episodes coming your way.
Da 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 da.
No.